Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Informed Home Buyer Podcast. I'm Rich Curtis, and I've got my lender here with me as usual. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Rich. Thanks for having me.
All right. So we've been doing a whole series on here. Of course, our goal is always to help you make the highest quality real estate decisions you can from the comfort of your couch. And to make high quality decisions, you need information. We've been going through a series on cost, the cost of home ownership. We did how much you have to put for a down payment. Last week, we went over 10 hidden fees that most buyers just don't know about, but you need to account for when you're saving to buy a home. And one of those upfront fees was inspections. We promised we would do a deeper dive into inspections, and today is that deeper dive. So we're going to go over sort of the standard inspections and what they cost and what you should be thinking about and worried about there. And the caveat to this is, of course, this is going to be different depending on where you live. Different regions have different specific issues. So there might be an inspection that is done on every real estate transaction every single time, no matter what, where you live, that I don't mention today. And that's just because that's not present in our market. I'll try to touch on some of those that I know about, but just know if we're skipping one, that's because it's just not one that's that common in our market. Dave and I both work in California, Northern California specifically. So this is going to be the inspections through that lens. So first off, and I'm sure Dave will agree, is the home inspection. So if you could only do one inspection and you could only pony up the money for one because you're on a tight budget, the one to never skip is a home inspection. It's going to cost you on average around $500. You might get one as cheap as $350, or if you're in a really big house, they can go $600-700. But the average is going to be right around $500. Now, this is going to be, you can think of it as a 30,000 foot view overview of the house. They're just going to tell you, I looked at it and it was normal or it wasn't. I tried it with its normal controls and it worked or it didn't. And if it wasn't normal or it didn't work, it's going to say, get some other professional in here who's smarter than me to go deeper and tell you what's wrong with this thing. And there's not going to be numbers attached to that. People get frustrated with this. Hey, it says this thing's wrong. How much does it cost to fix it? We need to get a different third-party specific provider in to get a bid on that most times. Home inspectors aren't legally allowed in the state of California to bid their work. Some will pay a third party to do it, but those are ballpark bids and they're not really good for anything. So if there's something really wrong, we'll get somebody out there specifically who only works on that thing to bid it for you. So like I said, you can budget $350 to $700 for this. $500 is a good line item placeholder for this. It's going to take 2 to 4 hours to get it done, and it's going to give you a ton of information. But one of the things that this has the potential to do is scare people away from good houses that they love for no good reason. This is going to be a 30-page report with a bunch of picky little things like reverse polarity outlets or a GFCI outlet that's not triggering, little things. And 90% of what's on this report has been present in every home you've ever lived in. You just didn't know about it. So all of that little stuff is there as your honey-do list, your repair list, your things to work on when you become a homeowner, because hey, that's the fun part. You have this new big asset you get to work on. But there's only really ever a few things that you're really worried about. Now, Dave has bought and sold a ton of houses personally. Dave, what are some of the big ticket items that you're worried about? Obviously, you're not worried about the electrical outlets. You're not worried about a tripping hazard on the front walkway. What are the things you actually worry about on these home inspections?
Right, Rich. You bring up a really good point here. And I know for this podcast, we're not talking a lot of lending specific stuff. I will bring in a point of view from a lender's perspective on various inspections that you cover today. But as someone that's bought and sold a lot of houses and works with a lot of first-time home buyers or other folks, and having bought and sold a lot of houses and being hands-on, really seeing what's involved to remedy certain things. I think the key things when buying a house and looking at the home inspection is big ticket items, things like an HVAC system, apparent roof issue. Maybe that won't be the home inspector, might be a roof inspector, but sometimes the home inspector, when they're crawling in the attic, they might see evidence of, roof leaks. And then, foundation type stuff, anything with water damage. It's, you want to make sure, okay, is there apparent water issues? And if the source has been fixed, it's usually a non-issue. But if there's, water that's present or continuing, and different times you buy a house in summer and sometimes they don't see stuff that you would see in winter. So, those are the types of things that I really pay attention to. And I learned to not overreact to the home inspection, because I think what you brought up is these are kind of boilerplate inspections that the inspector has to fill out. Questions, there's already questions there for the inspector to just, fill in stuff. So they're going to fill in whether good or bad, and then maybe add their twist to it. So I don't want to dominate the conversation here, but I'll keep jumping in as you go through the home inspection, because different things are coming to mind based on the age of the house and things of that nature.
Yeah. And these things, anything can be fixed with time and money. And that's where getting that third party bid to say, well, yeah, there's something wrong, but how much will it cost to fix? And is that a cost that the seller's willing to bear on your behalf? We can negotiate that for you. Is that a cost you're going to split with the seller? Is that something you're going to accept and just be like, no, I'm not worried about it? I sell houses all the time to tradespeople who are like, I can do that myself. Could care less. It's just going to cost me materials. Right. So some of this is dependent on you, your comfort zone, what you have access to. But yeah, big things like foundation. We were talking before we hit record on here. Yeah, I worked construction before real estate. I've been in real estate 20 years, so it's a long time ago. But my first broker called me up in a panic about a house, saying, come see, is this bad? And when he peeled back this area rug in the middle of this tract home, and the concrete slab was, heaved a foot across the entire middle of the living room. Right now, 20 years, this is the only time I've ever seen this, but that's pretty bad. It's something that extreme that would make us walk away from a house on inspections. Most of what it is little stuff that we just get repaired and we don't walk away from. The only other walk away one I've had in 20 years, I've had two where a single issue made someone walk away from a house. Sometimes in sum total, there's just too much wrong with the house, and it's the bills are adding up and it's time to walk away. I've had plenty of people walk away from houses, but a single issue walk away was that heaved slab. And we had one in Placerville with a 3,000-gallon spring-fed cistern in the basement of the house with a concrete cap on it that would just float up and let the water come out as the spring filled it. So the basement was in a constant state of being filled and drained by this spring that had been going on since the 1800s. Nothing you could possibly do about this. And it created such a wet environment that they were constantly battling mold and wood rot on the framing structure of this house. And my buyer rightfully walked away from that one, but it's these rare extremes that actually become a single issue walk away. By and large, home inspections turn out to just be a list of little things for you to take care of over time, and maybe one or two big things that we negotiate with the seller for on your behalf. So that's home inspection. Going to take 2 to 4 hours, going to cost you around $500. And if you did nothing else, if you want a real tight budget, that's the one not to skip. All right.
Moving on. Another thing on that, on that note, before you jump in, the home inspection, on a previous podcast, we talked about fees involved. In appraisals, another inspection that gets ordered through me is the lender. And one of the things that we do is we have timelines for that appraisal. I really coordinate with Rich, or your lender and your agent should really coordinate to try to get that home inspection done right away, and then have the appraisal follow after that report's been provided, so that you and your realtor, you and Rich, have an opportunity to look over that home inspection and identify, are we moving on to the next, is this safe to continue on before we spend too much money on inspections that you can't recapture?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it's the first one we order. It's one of the reasons why it's the one not to skip it. Not only will establish a timeline for ordering that appraisal, because if you did get a single walkaway issue like that cistern or the heave slab, you could walk away. You've only risked your $500. You didn't spend the $400 to $600 on an appraisal yet, because we ordered that home inspection first. So it's good timeline wise. The other thing is it also can establish who else and what other inspections we need to get out there. For example, you can always do an HVAC inspection, but if the home inspector says it's brand new and working great, why would you spend the money, right? You could do a roof inspection, but if the seller's told you it's a 2-year-old roof and the home inspector says it looks great, why spend that money? So the house and that home inspection is going to dictate some of the other decisions you make, and it could save you hundreds, if not thousands, in some cases, of dollars on additional items once the home inspector tells you what you really need to be concerned about with this particular home. So great point, Dave.
Yep.
The second inspection, and again, this is in the don't skip it category. If you can only do one, do the home inspection. But really, the bare minimum, in my opinion, is the home inspection and a pest inspection, structural pest inspection. It's a weird name, and mostly we're actually looking at structural issues in a pest inspection. They are looking for termites, they are looking for powder post beetles and active infestations, these kind of things, but it's just not a big deal. For instance, where Dave's office is in Folsom, you're talking about tract houses on slabs built in the last 25 years. I don't know if I've ever found termites in one of those, or very, very rarely. Up here in Placerville, it's a little more prevalent, but our termites, for whatever reason, grow slow, make slow tubes, and eat slow. And it's usually, you've got to be asleep at the wheel for a couple of decades before it's a real big deal. So usually termites might be, $1,000 to scrape them, treat them, and maybe, replace a board here or there. The far and away, mostly what we're finding and looking for on the structural pest inspections is water damage, dry rot, and then any foundation issues, like that heaved slab would come up. It's a structural defect. All slabs crack, all foundations, if you're doing a perimeter foundation with pier and post across the middle, raised foundation, all of those, the perimeter foundation is going to crack, concrete cracks. It's only big, really, heaved or displaced things that they're worrying about. So by and large, this is dry rot. And the average home is going to have about $5,000 worth of what we call Section 1 pest work, actual water damage to it. That's an average. Your house sitting here probably has at least that much right now. And that's a point of negotiation. Very often a buyer is going to ask a seller to compensate them for that money. Do be advised that the pest inspectors who make that report charge the most of anybody in the marketplace for those repairs. And you can usually get those repairs a lot cheaper by hiring a handyman or a contractor. The only thing you have to hire the pest guy for is anything that has a controlled substance, a chemical. In fact, Dave, you probably on your flips almost never use the pest guy. You probably just use your contractor for most.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Rich, and it really depends on the scope of the work and how much work there is. Because what happens is when you're, as a seller, when you're selling the property, and it doesn't affect the buyer as much if the seller's doing the work, is you get a copy of the pest inspection, you see what the issues are, and then you have to remedy the issues. And so then you need the pest inspector to go back out there and sign off on it, that it was done correctly. So if it's, a lot of work, you're right. Typically the pest companies, they're going to give a really high bid to do the work. And if there's not, like you said, if there's not chemicals involved, then you could oftentimes hire a handyman or some other trade to get that work done. But the challenge is if it's just a little bit of work and a low dollar item, I typically would have the pest company come out and give that clearance at the same time. And they're going to, so, and that's usually under $500 or $1,000, somewhere in that range, depending on what the work is. And so you might pay a little bit more, but you're getting your bang for the buck there. Once it becomes higher than that, then you're probably going to save some money having a contractor or someone that, specializes in that dry rot type work.
Yeah. And so from the buyer perspective, you might get a pest inspection with $5,000, $7,000 in Section 1. And that is something we very commonly can negotiate with the sellers on your behalf. There's never any guarantees, but that is, if there's a good listing agent on the other side, they've already prepared their seller to have some negotiations around the pest work in that regard. The report will also have some Section 2 items, which are things that could cause problems in the future. Like if you have dirt pushed up against your fence, it'll eventually rot it, and they'll say, scrape the dirt away, stuff like that. We're usually not negotiating on the Section 2 stuff, just on that Section 1 stuff. And again, usually this stuff isn't really earth shattering. When there's not bugs involved, the worst of it is when we get dry rot and roof sheathing, because then it's a little more expensive because you got to peel the roof back, deal with it, and then put the roofing back down. And sometimes, that's one of those cases where I might just hire the pest company to do that rather than a handyman. So it depends on the technicality of the work. But as a buyer, you can assume if you're getting a full credit for the full amount of the Section 1, if you were to hire out anything that's not chemicals with somebody else, you can probably get a 20 to 30% reduction on that cost. So that if the scope of work grew, you'd have a little 20 to 30% buffer. We used to say before the pandemic, almost 40 to 60 cents on the dollar, but everything's more expensive, right?
Right. Yeah. One other thing to point out on that, Rich, too, is, location of the property. I know we've done plenty properties, and, as you go out and you show folks property, the wild card oftentimes is a deck, and a big wooden deck. And so, when you're talking about a pest inspection, there may not be any termites in that deck, but maybe it's been sitting out in the weather for 15, 20 years, and it just wasn't installed correctly or hasn't been maintained. And so that usually can be, and the cost of lumber sometimes is, can be an expensive item to fix, but it's nothing that's not fixable. It's just one of those, like, the bigger the footprint of the deck, the more expensive it is to remedy it based on what might be wrong. And it might just be, hey, you got 3 bad boards in that deck, unscrew those if they're screwed in, hopefully, and replace those, and you're good to go. So
yeah, that's a good point. Decks have become a real big issue as of late. In the beginning of our career, Doug fir, even redwood was pretty cheap 20 years ago, but it's not the case now. So, I mean, decks can be $50,000-$60,000 for a big deck. And this is where, experience and options come in. When you look at these reports, you might see a $50,000 price tag on a deck, and you're probably not going to get a seller to credit you 50 grand on that deck. Even if they were, we wouldn't be allowed to get that much credit. We usually have a lender capped credit of around 3% of the total purchase price. And if you've already maybe negotiated a credit for closing costs previously, then you don't even have that much freeboard to work with. And then you're looking at a purchase price reduction, which if you don't have a lot of cash in the bank, still doesn't help you get a new deck. And so that's where we bring out contractors to give you options. Sometimes it's better just rip off the deck and put in a staircase.
Yeah.
Right. If it's a low deck, which are the ones that rot the worst because there's not airflow under them, often just delete the deck, put in a couple of stairs for a couple $1,000 and you're done, or if it's a staircase, couple $1,000, couple stairs, maybe, $500,000 and you're done. Or maybe you're just doing a smaller deck. You're taking the deck that used to go the full length of the house and you're making it just a little 4 foot by 8 foot, porch off the back door and then a staircase down. So decks can be a big deal and that can blow people's hair back, but it's not incumbent upon you to replace what's there. When these massive decks were built, it was because lumber was cheap. People aren't building on a normal everyday home a 60 foot by 10 foot wide deck anymore. That's just cost prohibitive. And so you don't have to replace what's there. And we can walk you through some of those options. Now, this inspection is going to cost you not very much, actually. It's why for what it tells you and for the protection it gives you, you're talking $150 to $250 depending on the company you choose and the market you're in. You might be in another state. By the way, we live in California. I love the state I live in. It is a gorgeous, beautiful place to live, but there's no doubt in it. Everything costs more in California. So if I'm saying home inspection is $500 and you're going, what? That's insane. You're probably in a different part of the country and that's okay. You might have to Google around, find the numbers for you. The advice is going to be the same. Get a home inspection, get a pest inspection, but it might cost a little bit cheaper. Even in California, here in El Dorado County, you're looking at $500 in the Bay Area. You're lucky, if you're in Alameda, you're lucky to get a home inspection less than $750. You're lucky to get a pest inspection less than $350. So it's going to be a little different, but your range here about $150 to $350 on your pest inspection, and it is money well spent. I have seen up to a $70,000 Section 1 pest inspection over the years. Again, there was 2 decks and kind of a rotting outbuilding involved in that. There was a lot going on, but these can be sleeping dragon level numbers or, go, no go decision type of numbers that come on the pest. And especially if you're not going to get any help from the seller on that. So it's definitely one not to skip. I actually can't think of any home I didn't get a pest inspection on in 20 years, except for when I bought my own home. So do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. And if stuff's glaring, the home inspector will see it. But when you get a pest inspection, they're going to walk around and they got this poker and they're famous for, maybe poking a little too hard on some wood, but they're going to go ahead and, if you're looking at eaves that you can't reach, you can't see, they're painted nice, they look nice. And I've seen a, pest inspector poke a piece of wood that looked perfectly solid and then the poker go right through it. And so
like paper.
Yes. So what's the issue there? And so, 2 things is you got a piece of dry rot or damaged wood, but what caused it? And so that's the kind of the thing you got to know is you could fix it and replace the piece of wood, but if you're not, and they're really good identifying or helping you identify what's the cause. And usually it's pretty apparent as well as, where a rain gutter is or a valley in a house that's missing a piece of flashing or something. And water is just over time, just destroying something, but you would have never seen it on your own into the eye, and paint can cover some things up that you just wouldn't see. So.
Yeah. And on that note, in terms of, things that are obvious. So most of these inspections aren't listed on the contract, which means they don't go to a lender and we don't deal with lending hurdles around them for the most part. But if there's something big and obvious, like a fully rotted out deck or a evident black, hanging rotted wood, there is another inspection. Like Dave mentioned in our last podcast, they consider the appraisal and inspection. An appraiser is going to come out, and if he's sketched out walking on that deck, feels like he's going to fall through it or whatever, then some of these things can get called out and have to be dealt with during our transaction by an appraiser. And when that happens, that's where we get into that creative landscape of, okay, maybe we're not replacing a 60-foot deck. Maybe we just rip that off, take it to the dump and build a staircase. And then the appraiser can come out and say, it's safe. You can close the transaction. If you decide to put a bigger deck on down the road, you can. But here's what we can accomplish within 30 days to make the house safe from a safety perspective and also safe from an investment perspective for the lender. The reason they send the appraiser out is to make sure that if, heaven forbid, you couldn't make your payments, they had to take it back, they have a sound asset that they could turn around and sell without having to put a new deck on themselves, right? They're protecting themselves. So some of these things that come out on inspection, if they're glaring and obvious or a high dollar enough item, can become a roadblock in a loan situation. And that's where having experienced agent and lender who can work together as a team to come up with the best solution that works both for the buyer, the seller, and the lender who's putting up the money to solve that problem is going to really help you out.
So. Hey, on that note, Rich, too, I know as a seller and your listing agent, how many of these inspections do you encourage the seller to get, or sometimes a deal's fallen out of contract and there's already an existing pest inspection? What do you do in that situation where you hand it to the buyer?
You're getting into an interesting regional difference and philosophical difference. So I'll tell you what we do, and then I'll tell you what I wish we did. So what's typical in El Dorado County, Sacramento County, Placer County, Amador County, those are the counties I work in and that Dave assists me in, is for the seller to essentially do no upfront inspections and the buyer to do all the inspections. We have a 17-day contingency period. And what this creates is a second round of negotiation at day 17. We've negotiated up front on the contract. Here's the price we're paying. And that can't change unless it's agreed upon by both people in writing. Now we do the 17-day investigation period and we uncover new information. And very often, in fact, nearly 100% of the time, the buyer comes back for a second round of negotiation to ask for credits or discounts based on the findings in their inspection reports. Now that, in my opinion, is less than ideal. It creates a very stressful situation. That second negotiation can be very contentious. And it's something that as a professional negotiator on your behalf, I help walk you through that and give you the best strategies for that. Other markets do it differently. If you're a lot of people who relocate to El Dorado County come from the Bay Area, and they find this very frustrating when they come here. In the Bay Area, seller pays for all the inspections up front. They put them all in a PDF and they send it out to every buyer and have them sign off on them before they ever write an offer. So if I'm asking $500,000 for my house and it needs $50,000 in repairs, and you saw that up front, whatever price you put on paper was with full knowledge of everything that's wrong with that house. So that's our price. There's very rarely a second round of negotiation on homes in the Bay Area because it's all shown up front. I love that. I think it's a much more transparent way to go. I think it's a much more stressful way to go. It's better on buyers and sellers. I wish we did it that way. But here's the thing for any sellers watching. If you did it that way in a market where it doesn't, then you might be providing information you don't need to provide to a buyer. Your buyer may not do this or that inspection in our market, and it's not something you have to deal with. Once you have a report, it is a material fact. You have to provide it to a buyer no matter what. And so as sellers in a market where we don't typically pay for them up front, I encourage mine not to pay for them up front. Let the buyer choose what they want. But I do wish we did it differently.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the way you do it, Rich, and worked with, several agents before. And when I deal with the listing agent and there's, that conversation halfway or towards the end of the contingency period is really just communication, right? And being pragmatic about what you're asking for. And so if there's issues and it's a $5,000 issue, you're going to ask for $5,000. You're not going to ask for $10,000. And it's really how you communicate and when you communicate that as well. I think that's, because a lot of times the seller or the listing agent are aware or generally aware that these things might come up if they're things that are highly visible. If it's a fallen off, deck that's falling down, they're aware of that. If it's, some dry rot and some stuff that only a pest inspector would find, they may not be aware of it. But, just being realistic and protecting your buyers and saying, here's the cost of cure. What do you want to do? Nothing more.
Yeah. And a lot of them are already planning on paying for it, or a lot of them are already planning on contributing to you for it going in. The psychology of this is that if they set the price of the house at $500,000, even though they wanted $550 for it, it was worth $550 because they knew it needed $50,000 worth of repairs. Once you, Mr. Buyer, find out it needs $50,000 worth of repairs, you want it for $450, no matter what. So a lot of times they know, we have a lot of old electrical panels, Zinsco panels, for example, Dave. You've probably had one on a lot of the flips you've done. You used to get them replaced for like $2,500. Now it's a little closer to 5,000. They're known to burn houses down. Everybody knows it's a bad deal. They got to go. A seller upfront knows they've got a Zinsco that they were willing to take the risk and live with, but they're going to have to compensate a buyer for it. But they don't do it up front, or they don't reduce for it up front because they know you're going to want it anyway. And it's better to let you ask for it and compensate you for it, so everybody feels good in the negotiations. So sometimes buyers are a little timid to ask for things, but if you're asking for something legitimate, and you're doing it in an upfront, above board way with a transparent bid that says, here's a real problem and here's the cost to cure. Most of the time those things go pretty well. It doesn't mean you always get what you want, but I find most people by and large are pretty reasonable about things that are kind of a health and safety risk.
Sure.
Yeah. So we've gone over home inspection and pest inspection. Right now, you're into it in our market for maybe $750 out of pocket, and you've got a tremendous amount of information and what I call cheap insurance against sort of sleeping dragon problems that'll cost you a lot of money down the road. Next, we're getting into some that you may or may not choose to do depending on the house. Roof inspection, right? I almost always recommend doing a roof inspection, except in cases when there's a brand new roof. I've seen brand new roofs installed improperly, but usually a home inspector will call that out and then say, get a roof inspection. But if it's got a brand new roof in the last 2 to 3 years and the home inspector says, man, everything looks great to me, you can save yourself some money there. You used to get a lot of roof inspections for free, and the industry shifted on that. Now you're usually paying about $180 to $250 for a roof inspection. So it's not nothing. So usually I wait. Now, I've been doing this 20 years. And so when we tour a property, I am not saying it's amazing, buy it. I'm giving you the bulk of a home inspection as we walk around the property. I can tell when a roof is pretty well shot. I can tell when an HVAC is old and pretty well shot. I can spot water damage in a lot of stuff. So my buyers kind of know what they're in for going in. So if I already know the roof is a dog, then I'm going to just order that roof inspection up front. If the roof looks pretty good to me, then, I'll let the home inspector tell us whether we need deeper eyes on it. Because even if the field shingles look good, there's flashing or storm collars or things like that sometimes need some work that I can't see from the ground level and things like that. So if it looks pretty good, we'll let the home inspector tell us. If we know it's a dog up front, we'll order the roof inspection. If you do the roof inspection, like I say, let's just call it round numbers, another $200, you're at $950 on the high end right now for inspecting the property. And you've touched all the major systems. You've not gone deep on them, but if you do just to here, you've touched all the major systems of urban or suburban houses. Rural is different, but urban and suburban markets. So your Sacramento market, your Roseville, Rockland, Folsom, Granite Bay, although Granite Bay, and then like Loomis, Rockland, you might touch into a little bit of rural properties. So let's touch on 2 inspections for rural properties. Well inspection and septic inspection. If there's a well present, you always want to get a well inspection. If there's a septic present, you always want to get a septic inspection. Now, these are 2 that typically we ask for a seller to pay for on your behalf. So usually you're not out of pocket on these. But if you were, you're going to pay $450 to $500 to have the well inspected, and you're going to pay about $150 usually to get the septic inspected. There's additional cost in digging it up and locating it. We can almost always get the seller to pay that amount. So you don't usually have to worry about that. So you could be out, if the seller wouldn't pay for it, another $650 on these. Now, if those are present, those fall under the category of a home inspection. They are a mandatory. Do not skip these. Wells can be very expensive to repair. Well pump alone, you might only be into the pump a couple, $1,500, but you're going to be a few grand total in the work to get this thing installed. Septics, also, if they're actually shot, can be very costly. And if it's a small lot where you don't have a replacement area, it can get real dicey in permitting things with the county. So these are, do not skip them, inspections. If you're not familiar, well is a domestic, water supply where you don't have water from the city coming to you. So you have your own well. It's being pumped out of the ground. You're maintaining all the systems of that yourself, the casing, the pump, the electricity. And if it stops producing, you have to go deeper or dig a new one. Septic is a sewage disposal system when you don't have city sewer. So these are really important ones. I personally have come across a lot of shot septics. I don't know if you've experienced that on your flips.
Yeah, and there's all varying degrees, and some of them have different issues. Some have leach fields, and you got to make sure there's a what they call like a percolating test, and the water, drains out accordingly. Uh, things where we see it a lot where the tank's good, but the lid's been crushed in or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's just really worth it to get a test and know for sure. And
Yeah.
and I do think that especially if you're a seller and you have septic, you're pretty prepared to get that inspection and know that that's coming, and sometimes they would do that ahead of time. um, or
Yeah.
that's something that they've at least maintained over the years. They've had to get, maybe it's 2 years since their last septic inspection or pumping or whatever that might be. So but yeah, I've ran
Yeah.
into all different issues.
It's rare to get pushback from a seller too on a septic repair. Everybody kind of understands that the
Hmm.
sewage has got to get out and go. So usually, if there's repairs involved with that, we're going to get them done. And in fact, if we're listing it on the contract, usually they're going to have to provide us a septic certification for the lender to write the loan.
Hmm.
So they're going to have to deal with those problems anyway if they want us to get the loan and be able to complete the transaction. So
Right.
usually, for the most part, septic gets taken care of for you, but not always. It is a point of negotiation. All right. Now, this one, Dave and I both have horror stories to deal with this one. Sewer lateral camera inspection.
Hmm.
So this is a camera that they run down the sewer system from the clean out, or if they don't have a clean out, from the roof jack, and they're looking to see if the sewer is okay. And this is something where, age of the house matters. The older the house, the more likely it is to have things like Orangeburg. Sacramento has a lot of Orangeburg,
Hmm.
which is a clay type of sewer pipe that turns into paper, gets riddled with tree roots
Hmm.
and obliterated. And this, cost used to be $3,500 would get you a sewer lateral replace. Now it's,
Yeah.
5 to 8 grand in some cases. It's gotten more expensive. And I had a young couple. They did one of my first 5 transactions. They said, "Not, we don't have the money. I'm not paying for that sewer camera. It'll be fine." This was in the Arden area,
Hmm.
Sacramento. And about 2 months into it, they literally had tree roots growing through the wax ring of their toilet. And it was an old 50s house with carpet in the bathroom. They peeled up the
Ugh.
carpet and the whole subfloor had tree roots in it. The sewer was completely shot, and they had to replace the entire sewer, get all the roots removed, replace the subfloor in the bathroom. It was horrendous. And from that moment forward, I've been much more forceful with my clients about this particular inspection on older homes.
Yeah, and maybe be more forceful about having carpet in a bathroom too. So you're
Yeah,
right.
terrible idea. That still
Yeah,
happens even in
I've seen it.
in
I've seen
Folsom.
it.
90s tract houses still had carpet in
Okay.
the bathroom.
Yeah, I've definitely seen the Arden area and carpet in the bathroom. I don't understand it. I think, yeah. Anyway, so from a
Yeah, yeah,
flipper's perspective, it's easy to peel out and replace. Then easier than tile and whatnot. But just yeah, not wouldn't
yeah.
be
But
my
is
my
this an
preference.
inspection you frequently did on your flips?
Yes, based on the age of the house and the location. And so
Yeah,
when you brought up the cost to cure is so, when you're thinking about a sewer camera going down, so in a lot of the homes um, that we're talking about that require or that typically get a sewer inspection, oftentimes are raised foundation homes. So
yeah,
there's sewer line that's underneath the house that's visible that you can see. It's not necessarily buried at till it gets towards the exit point or towards the yard. And then it depends on what's the landscape and what's taking place from where the sewer line goes to the street, and then at what point different sidewalks and curbs, where is it you're responsible as the homeowner versus the city. And
yeah.
so it's always for the cost to get the camera to go down, peace of mind, it's way better to do it because you're just going to save yourself thousands of dollars. Even if there's a minor issue, you want to get that resolved. So if there's a house based on the age, and Rich is really versed in understanding those types of homes that need a sewer inspection, by all means get it. It's going to save you in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a tract house in Folsom on a slab foundation built in the early 2000s up till now that's got an
Yeah.
ABS sewer pipe in it, I say it's optional. Still can be good to do because people could
Yeah.
have clogged it. There could be problems, but
Yeah.
whatever problems you're likely to find are not going to be catastrophic problems, right? But in the older parts of Sacramento, it's an always do. It's probably 3 to 5 sewer laterals that I have sellers replace a year doing this inspection. So that's 3 to 5 clients that save 5 to 8 grand a year by spending this. This inspection will cost you about $250. maybe 300 if they have to go through the roof jack or pull a toilet to do it. And so for $250 to $300, you save yourself $5 to $8 grand on any kind of math. That's real cheap insurance for this particular inspection.
100%.
So that's
it's insurance is what it is. It's an insurance policy. And, you're not going to take that risk with your car and driving around without insurance. Certainly, that's the time to do it is before you close escrow and purchase that house.
Before you buy their problem. Yeah.
Yes, correct.
The nuance to this, septic inspectors do not inspect the sewer lateral. So if you're on city sewer, it is your responsibility from the house to the city main, which is usually somewhere at the sidewalk line or a little bit out into the street. That's all your responsibility to replace. That's where that $5 to $8 grand comes in. On a septic, it's all your responsibility, but the septic inspectors do not look at the lateral from the house to the septic. Most of these and like the foothills here, if they're older houses, they're cast iron, in which case it's a pretty decent idea to do. Cast iron has some rust issues and things like that. But if they're newer or have already been replaced, they're ABS and they're above ground, in which case I don't really worry about it too much, because 10 minutes with a Sawzall and, a couple $100 worth of plastic from Home Depot, and you can replace the thing yourself in the crawl space. So again, it depends on the systems of the house and the age of the house, whether this is a must do, but certainly older houses on city sewer, it's a must do. So if you're following along, you're at maybe $1,150, $1,200 right now, all up on inspections, not including the cost of well and septic if you're on a rural property, because that would be covered by the seller. HVAC inspection, that is checking out your heating and your air conditioning. This one's going to cost you between $180 and $280. And this one's kind of a funny one. Either the system's really brand new and then we say don't bother, or the system's really, really old and then we also say don't bother. We just say, hey, look, know that this thing's going to go belly up very soon, and you need to be budgeting for a new HVAC system when you buy this house. Now, to put that in perspective, a package system, like all in one unit, you might be looking at $9,000 to $13,000 depending. And a split system, the one where you have the little air conditioning condenser outside and then you have the furnace in your attic or crawl space, those are going to be in the 15 to 20 grand range, retail pricing. So this is not cheap, but if it's old and it's dead and it's shot, it's not worth the $250 to inspect it. You got a budget for replacing it, and then you may have to negotiate with the seller for some version of a credit on that. I should say, when we're negotiating with the seller, it is important as a buyer. Of course, as your buyer's agent, I negotiate aggressively on your behalf and I do what you ask me to do. But I think it's important to have a mindset that you are buying a used house. So when you buy a used car, you don't expect it to be perfect. If you buy a used bike or a used snowboard, you expect it to have some problems. You're buying used and getting a discount as such because it is used. Same with a house. It is not a reasonable expectation for a used home to have a brand new roof, a brand new HVAC, a brand new hot water heater. It is a reasonable expectation when you're spending this much money to have those systems have some life left in them. And so it may not be that you're getting 100% credit for a $10,000 HVAC system or $15,000 HVAC system. It may be that you're splitting this with the seller and saying, yeah, I'm going to get the benefit now of having a brand new system that'll last me 30 years. But your system's not going to last me 5 years. And that's unacceptable. So you're going to pay for half of it for me, something like that. So we're not always coming after these people for 100% of the cost of 100% of what's wrong with the home. We're applying a reasonable filter to our negotiations.
Yeah. One other point on that, Rich, and maybe you can elaborate. And when you recommend this, so that situation, you said the HVAC system, it's working, but it looks, like it's decades old. And the buyers know they have to replace it and they're going to have to replace it soon. At what point do you recommend a home warranty where, hey, that's, trade call, $75, maybe they'll get it working. They'll get you through for a year until you can save enough money to replace this system. And we know from an efficiency standpoint and all the reasons why you might want to replace that HVAC system, but maybe you could touch on that, what your thoughts are on, a home warranty as a stopgap.
Yeah. And my position on home warranty changes depending on whether I'm representing buyers or sellers. In this case, we're talking buyers, but when I'm representing a seller, always pay for home warranty for somebody. It's cheap insurance. It stops the callbacks. This broke, that broke, whatever. Even though they don't have a basis to call back after the transaction, we still get those callbacks. And it's nice to just say, call a home warranty. I paid for one for you, right? From a buyer's perspective, only take a home warranty if, in my opinion, and others may differ on this, and Dave, you may differ, so jump in. Only take a home warranty if someone else is paying for it. this is going to cost you these days $600, $750 for a decent one. And I've never had a client get an item replaced by home warranty. They're always going to Band-Aid that sucker until it gets over the 1 year mark, and then it's not their problem. So you got a 1 year home warranty. You're going to pay $50 to $100 for a service call. They're going to Band-Aid it together, and then it's going to go belly up at 13 months when your home warranty went out at 12 months.
I think in that situation, Rich, is it's never thinking. I never think of a home warranty as something that's going to replace items.
Yeah,
more as
just keep them moving.
A Band-Aid to keep moving until you're in a financial situation, or you just want to use the most useful life out of something. And even things like garbage disposal goes out, you're going to call a plumber. So for the first year, if you can get, like you said, if you get the seller to pay for a home warranty and it's a $75 trade call, they're going to come out. And the other part of the home warranty is, you're not responsible for necessarily tracking down. You call the home warranty and they vet and track down the tradespeople. So if you're going
Correct.
somewhere new, that's kind of nice, unless you have a Rolodex of trade people that are part of your inner circle. That's another reason why you might want to get a home warranty, especially if someone else is paying for it.
Yeah, which by the way is a side note. That is, we don't break up at the end of the transaction. Dave and I are always a resource for you, and we have an extensive personal Rolodex. You're making us sound like geezers, by the way, Dave. I keep those in my cell phone now. But we have an extensive list of tradespeople that we can help. Yeah. Never, ever use an HVAC person that advertises on a truck, a radio, or a TV. They're all wildly crooked. We have personal individual tradespeople we've worked with for years and trust, so we can provide that service to you. But getting back to home warranties, if the seller's going to pay for it for you, always take it. Try to get them to pay for it. If you're going to pay for it yourself, that $600-700 comes out of your pocket, right? My dishwasher just went out. Of course, I'm leaving for a 6-day trip with my kids, heading out to the airport, and the dishwasher dies. I think I'm looking at dishwashers going to be $500 to $800. So I would rather save my $600 to $700 and just buy the new dishwasher when it breaks, rather than let these people, glue it back together with chewing gum and baling wire and get it over the 12-month mark. So for my buyers, if you're going to have to pay for it out of pocket, if the seller doesn't want to pay for it, I think you're better off keeping that money in your pocket to replace, because it's rare that 2, 3, 4 things go belly up in the first 12 months. Could happen, right? You could have bad luck, but if just one of them goes belly up, your $600 or $700 is better applied to just buying a brand new unit for whatever that is, than the home warranty if you're paying for it yourself. With the caveat, like Dave was talking about, if you're not handy and you can't do any work yourself, you're in a new area, you don't know anybody, or you just are wildly busy and you just don't have the time to deal with this sort of thing. You don't even have the time to deal with buying a new dishwasher because you're going to get on the plane for work and go to the next location, calling the home warranty company, have them fix it so it's working when you get back. That's worth it. So for a couple of use cases, particular buyers, it's worth spending out of pocket. But usually where I stand is, as a buyer, if somebody buys it for you, take it. If you're going to have to pay for it out of pocket, then don't bother. Save that money. That's where I stand on home warranties.
Got it. Thanks.
So, all right. So that covers HVAC inspection. Again, here you might be up to about $1,400, $1,500 all up at the high end on inspections, and you've gotten a tremendous amount of information. From here, the next 4 I have to talk about are not done standard, with the exception of one of them: pool and spa inspections. If there's a pool and spa present, I always recommend getting the pool and the spa inspected. There's some caveats to this. If it's a liner pool, a lot of inspectors don't inspect them. If it's a fiberglass pool, a lot of inspectors don't inspect them. And if it's an above ground pool, nobody inspects them. But if it's a standard, like in-ground gunite type of pool, we have we're spoiled for choice on inspectors. Good inspectors come out and inspect the pool, and most pool inspectors will do the spa at the same time, even freestanding spas. And that's always worthwhile, because pools, plastering a pool, it used to be we could get it done for like $5,000, but I think the last quote I got was like $15,000 to replaster a reasonably sized, not crazy residential pool. So that's a big deal if the pool is going to need replastering. Most of them don't leak check a pool unless there's a sign that there is some kind of problem. It's a multi-day process to leak check a pool. But if we have indications of that, we can leak check the pool. Then the pool equipment, all up, everything sitting on that pad can be, depending on what choices you make, $3,000 to $5,000 worth of pool equipment. You want to know that stuff's in good working order as well. Spas are a little bit cheaper. Spa motors aren't that bad, but this is one that, if it's present, I always recommend doing if you've got it in your budget to do it. Now, these next ones are the ones that we almost never do. Survey. Look, most properties have been surveyed already. Most properties have a record of survey. You can get a good idea. You can't rely on fences, and it is required that as your realtor, I tell you the only way you know the actual boundaries of a property is if you go and have a surveyor tell you what they are. That being said, surveys cost thousands of dollars, anywhere from 2,000 on the low end to 10,000. And it can take them sometimes 2 months just to do the initial survey work, which is not feasible during an escrow period. And it can take right now at our county to record like 12 to 18 months to record a new record of survey. So all of this is going to happen after you're the owner. So the only time we have surveys come out is usually if there is a dispute already or some question that we have. And I'm sure Dave's got some stories of, have you had any boundary disputes on any of the
No,
flips there?
I've had many, because typically when you think there's an infringement into your boundary, is when you want to look into it. But a lot of the houses that are, places that have minimum acre parcels, and there's unless someone's really doing something close to the property line, you're not really concerned about it. And so rarely has there been a situation where I've even, thought about getting a survey. And usually looking at the map on the prelim, and, you got the plot map, you have a general idea, but obviously not as efficient as the survey. So.
Yeah, I can tell you a couple situations I've had one come out. I had one where when I print off a map from you from the MLS, that's really a Google map overlay over the assessor parcels mapping system, and it's off. Our civilian GPS is sort of intentionally off from the military GPS just from the get-go. We're already starting off a little bit, by design. And then, the Google, it's just not that good. So this had a property line going right through the swimming pool of this particular house. And we wanted to make sure that wasn't actually the case, that the property line didn't go through the middle of the swimming pool. And so then we had a survey out. It cost about $1,200, and he didn't do a full survey. He just looked at that one boundary line and said, nope, the boundary line is on the other side of the pool. This was just a computer mistake. You're good to go. Ironically, on his map, it showed what looked like a road right through the middle of the living room. And he uncovered an old easement that was running right through the living room of this house that nobody had found in the last 3 transaction cycles. My client ended up buying the house anyway, and then suing the title company and getting the title company to get the neighbor to forego the easement. It took him a couple of years to do that, but he loved the property enough to do it. But we did find something additional in that case that was unknown to the buyer. So in rare cases, it is worth getting a surveyor out. There have been other times where I've seen remnants of old roads in Gold Rush country. There could be a road there from the 1800s, but it comes with prescriptive easement rights for people who've been traveling it for decades. And so sometimes we'll have a surveyor come out and say, hey, I've had properties where old Highway 49 went right through the property. Is that old Highway 49? Is that what I think it is? So again, we might pay them $1,500 to come out and tell us if that's it. And then the buyer can decide whether they're okay with the locals jogging across their land on that old highway, those types of things. So that's really when we do it. Something that's more common is a pin find. We know there's pins in the ground because a survey's been done. When they do a survey, they pound pins into the corners. On rural property, they get knocked over by deers, buried by debris over the years. Sometimes little mudslides in the winter or runoff knock them loose. So we frequently have paid $400 to $800 for a guy to come out and just find the pins and show you where the corners are. That is something that is more common. If you want that done, that would be, like I say, in that $400 to $1,000 range for survey. But for the most part, the vast majority of you are going to be buying a lot that was cut up as part of an intentional division of land that already has a survey, and it's not a problem. And the last 2 are radon gas and mold. Mold is something that we only really look into if we see it. So if we see it and we have reason to worry about it, then we'll get a mold out. And I can't even give you a quote. There's the inspection, there's the lab tests, and then there's poking holes in walls, tearing things down, replacing them. Mold can get sort of really out of hand sometimes in terms of what you pay and do to look into it. But you can assume if you're going to start digging into mold, it's going to start in the 500 range just to get some basics done. And it can balloon to a couple of $1,000s to do a real workup on that. And I'm talking like 2-3 times in 20 years I've had a house with evident mold coming through the sheetrock that made us do those kind of inspections. Radon gas is a naturally occurring gas that comes up from granite in the soil. Mostly affects raised foundation houses, can be worse in your house and not present at all in your neighbor's house because it's just based on where the rocks are under the house. It tends to, for whatever reason, not be something Californians care a whole lot about. I've done 2 of those in 20 years. For the most part, people just don't do it. If you want to do it and you're worried about it, we can do it. Takes a couple of days, costs about $500 to do the test. So all up, if you did the everything, you're looking at $2,000, maybe $2,500 in inspections. But all of this will give you such a massive amount of knowledge about the property so you can negotiate for things you care about, or worst case scenario, walk away from the deal if it's not right. But in terms of the cost of home ownership, you can put on your budget to save up for, at the low end, 500 and at the high end, 2,500 in inspection costs. So, all right, Dave, anything to add to inspections from your perspective or lending perspective?
No, I think we're good. I think the last thing I would just maybe touch on briefly, and I think you're really versed at this and comes back to surveys and whatnot, is the preliminary title report, which is basically an inspection report in itself that you get on every transaction, and you have an opportunity to review that. And I think this is where someone with your expertise really is, identifying some things that could be problematic by looking at that preliminary title report. And us as a lender, I review the preliminary title report to see if there's, some liens on there or something that, different things that could show up on there. If there's solar on the house, and is there a solar lien? There's just a lot of just things that you and I would look at unbeknownst to the buyer. It's not necessarily our responsibility, but having been doing this for as long as we have, we tend to look at that early and try to get in front of any issues that would be a problem later down the road.
Yeah, and there are some things on there that hit the lending sphere. Legal description being messed up will have to be fixed, for the lender to loan. If there's a solar lease on the property that you have to assume as the buyer, that becomes a new bill, a new monthly bill that you have, which changes your monthly and debt to income ratio stuff. Like, you still have to qualify now for the payment plus the extra $200 a month for the solar or whatever, just the way an HOA fee would affect your qualification. So there's some things Dave's looking for to say, oops, we have to rerun our qualification because now there's some new charges, right?
Right. Yep. That's it.
And you would have to, do you have to put them all the way through DU, or can you just usually look at that and figure they're going to be okay?
I could usually look at that and figure they're going to be okay. And so sometimes where I've seen it, where if it's a lease, does the solar go away? If the current owner had bought the solar and there's a payment plan with that solar, now that or lease, it could be transferred to the new buyer. They just have to qualify. So we have to build that payment into their debt to income ratio. So, and those are things that, as a lender, I'm not actually physically seeing the house. So I might not notice something like that until we look at the preliminary title report and it pops up. And I know, you just had an issue where you had a buyer buy a house and they sold their house, and there was some old lien that the title company is responsible for that didn't show up. So, there's also, anyway, I'll let you elaborate on that if you want, or maybe that's another podcast.
Yeah, it does happen from time to time. The preliminary title report is going to say, basically, here's who owns it. They're the legal owner. They're the only legal owner. The person you're in contract with has the right to sell you the house. And if we as a title company are wrong, we're issuing an insurance policy to you that will fix that. And there's no liens on the property, or there are liens. Liens are financial encumbrances on the property for different things. Say you had a roof put on the house and you had an argument with the roofing contractor. You didn't want to pay him. And he said, no, the hell with you. You didn't do a good job. I'm not going to pay you. And he said, well, the hell with you. Then I'm going to put a lien on the property, puts a mechanics lien on the property for the cost of the roof. You may have a $10,000 lien on the property that has to be satisfied before you sell it to somebody else. On the buyer's end, you have to know it's been satisfied before you can get your loan and close on the property. So those sorts of things pop. And if a title company misses that, like this one recently did, then you got to go back at them and have them, pay and compensate that for them. But also it shows up easements and things like this. And specifically in my area, it shows up crazy things like mining rights. A lot of the, gold was discovered in Coloma and Lotus, 20 minutes north of Placerville. This is a gold rush era town. And I sell, probably half a dozen a year that have mining rights left on them, that for the most part, we can't even track down who the heck is the rightful owner of those mining rights anymore. Usually they're only underground rights. I've not sold one with surface rights, where someone could actually come on and tear up your property. But we still have to go through that kind of stuff and make sure you understand the implications of it. Now with the title report, this is mostly incurables, mostly go, no go. If there's mining rights and you don't like it, we're not getting rid of them. So you just got to go away. If there's CC&Rs, which is an antiquated form of HOA, and you don't like the rules, you don't buy the house. We can't fix it. If there's easements on the property that you don't like, very rare cases you can get an easement abandoned, but pretty much you should think, no, you can't get that. The only things that are curable are the things like liens. We can cure those. Clouds on the title, we can get rid of some of those. But for the most part, the title report is a go, no go type of decision. And so we just go over it with you, make sure you understand it, and you can decide whether you're going to do it or not. You technically are paying for that report, but only if you close escrow and it's lumped into your overall escrow fee, which you can hear more about in our last podcast where we went over the 10 hidden fees for buyers. But it is something that you get early on in the transaction. And we try to go over that right away so that we don't even pay for a home inspection if there's major problems on that report right off the bat. So we're trying to get that in the first couple of days out of title. Usually the listing agent's got that for us already on day one. And so Dave and I can look at that and tell you whether you're good to go or not on that. But good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yep. It is an inspection, just not one you are paying out of pocket for up front.
Right.
So, all right, guys, that wraps up our series here on the cost of home ownership. We've just gone through about 2,500 max worth of fees that you'll pay out of pocket up front to purchase a home. I hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments down below or shoot us a DM. We can answer those. We can even answer them for you on a future podcast. Thanks for watching. As usual, thanks for getting to the end with us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Rich. See ya.
Thanks, Dave.